Princess Talzuraya was not like other royalty. Born into the Velari dominion, she was a being of immense power, her mind sharp, and her psionic abilities unmatched. Her people ruled over countless planets, and to them, the Velari were the most advanced species in the galaxy. Yet, Talzuraya had always refused the suitors who came to court her. For years, her parents had tried to marry her off to one noble or another, each more powerful and influential than the last. But Talzuraya turned them all away. The men and women who came to win her favor were nothing more than pawns in her father's game, political tools meant to strengthen alliances, not real love or respect. Her refusal to marry had made her famous throughout the Dominion, and not in a good way. To her people, she was seen as rebellious, a ruler who would not bow to tradition. But Talzuraya did not care. She did not want to be a trophy wife for some warlord or diplomat. She wanted power, freedom, and control over her own destiny. Marriage, to her, was nothing more than a prison. The human delegation arrived on Velari Prime during a time of tense negotiations. The Dominion was considering entering into trade agreements with Earth, a planet many Velari viewed as backward and insignificant. But this was the first time the Dominion was even considering such an alliance, so it was a significant moment in the galaxy's politics. The human ambassador, Commander Jason Rourke, was unlike any man Talzuraya had ever seen. Tall, strong, and confident, he carried himself with a calm authority that was rare among the Velari. His eyes, sharp and piercing, seemed to take in everything around him, yet his face held no sign of fear or intimidation. The moment he stepped onto Velari Prime, he became the center of attention. At a grand diplomatic ball, the humans mingled with the elite of Velari society. Talzuraya stood on the balcony, looking down at the assembly. She was uninterested in the event, her thoughts elsewhere. That was until she saw Commander Rourke. He was surrounded by a group of Velari nobles, but his eyes were not on them. Instead, they locked with hers for a brief moment. In that instant, Talzuraya felt something stir inside her. It wasn't attraction. It was something else, something she couldn't explain. The Velari believed themselves superior, but here was a human who wasn't cowed by their power. This man wasn't trying to flatter her or win her favor like the others. He was different. Talzuraya's heart beat faster, but she quickly turned away. She was the princess of the Velari Dominion. She couldn't afford to be distracted by such a foolish thought. Humans were beneath her, after all. Still, the brief exchange lingered in her mind, something she couldn't shake. The grand hall of Velari Prime's palace was filled with the richest nobles and most powerful leaders in the galaxy. Tonight was one of the most important events in the Dominion's history, the diplomatic ball for the new trade negotiations with Earth. Princess Talzuraya stood beside her father, the Emperor, looking down at the crowded room. Every politician, every ambassador, and every noble in the room had a reason to be here, but Talzuraya could not have cared less. She glanced over the guests, her mind distracted. The faces were all the same, people who only cared about power, politics, and alliances. Among the humans, however, there was one man who had caught her attention earlier in the day. Commander Jason Rourke. He was not a man of noble blood, nor was he a wealthy diplomat. He was a soldier, one of Earth's finest. He had come with his delegation, not out of ambition, but to secure peace. His eyes were sharp, but his gaze was different from the others. While the Velari nobles looked at Talzuraya with awe or greed, Rourke looked at her with something else, something that made her feel strange. But there was no time to think about that now. The event was important. The trade deal with Earth would strengthen the Dominion's economy, and her father, the Emperor, was excited to make it happen. Just as Talzuraya was about to look away from the crowd, a voice broke through the noise. "Your Highness, Princess Talzuraya," a noble called from across the room. "May I introduce Commander Rourke of Earth?" Talzuraya turned to find the human standing before her, flanked by his fellow Earth diplomats. His confident smile caught her attention again. She knew he had come to the ball to represent his planet, but there was something about the way he carried himself, something that made her want to know more. Before she could speak, one of the Valyri nobles, Lord Scytherin, an arrogant warlord, stepped forward. His voice was loud, commanding, and full of pride. "Princess," Lord Scytherin said with a mocking bow, "I do hope that you are not actually considering trading with these humans. Surely the Dominion is not desperate enough to lower itself to that level." The crowd grew quiet, eyes turning to the princess. Dalzuria's face tightened, her eyes flashing with anger. She hated when people looked down on others, but she had never expected it to come from her own people. Her father, the Emperor, watched with interest, waiting to see how his daughter would respond. Jason Rourke, however, did not wait for her. He stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Lord Scytherin," he said, his tone cold, "if you are talking about the human race, then I can assure you, we're nothing like you think we are. We're resourceful, strong, and we don't back down. And if you think we'll let insults like that slide, you are sorely mistaken." There was a stunned silence. Zalzuria's eyes widened, her heart racing. No one had ever spoken so boldly in front of the princess, especially not a human. Lord Scytherin's face flushed red with rage, but he did not respond. Instead, the Emperor chuckled softly from behind her, amused by the scene. The tension in the room was thick, but Jason Rourke didn't back down. He stood his ground, looking Lord Scytherin directly in the eye. Zalzuria couldn't help herself. She felt a strange thrill rush through her veins. Here was a human who wasn't afraid, who wasn't bowing down to the Valyri. And for the first time, she was interested. The atmosphere in the grand hall had shifted. What had started as a simple diplomatic gathering now felt like a battleground. Princess Zalzuria stood silently as her father, Emperor Veros, stepped forward, his gaze narrowing at Commander Jason Rourke. The crowd was still, waiting for the Emperor's response. Lord Scytherin, still furious from the public insult, could no longer hold his tongue. With a deep growl, he bowed mockingly to the Emperor and said, "Your Majesty, this human has no respect for our traditions, no understanding of the power we hold. I suggest we show him the proper way to behave in our presence." The Emperor's eyes flicked from Lord Scytherin to Jason. His lips curled into a slight smile. He was always interested in testing his people, seeing who could rise to the challenge. And now he saw an opportunity to do just that. "I agree with Lord Scytherin," Emperor Veros said, his voice low and calculating. "It seems our guest needs to learn that words alone cannot win respect here in the Dominion. Let us test his mettle." The crowd murmured, and Zalzuria felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Her father's words were clear. Jason was about to face a trial, and it would not be easy. Before anyone could speak, the Emperor turned to Jason. "Commander Rourke," he said, his voice booming across the hall, "if you truly believe humans are worthy of respect, you will prove it. A challenge will be set before you. Defeat our champion, and I will consider your race worthy of our trade. Fail, and you will leave Valyri Prime in shame." Jason stood tall, his expression unreadable, but there was no hesitation in his eyes. He nodded once, understanding the gravity of what was happening. "Who is your champion?" Jason asked. Lord Scytherin, eager to prove his superiority, stepped forward. "I will be the one to teach this human his place," he declared, his voice filled with pride. The tension in the room grew thicker. Scytherin was known across the Dominion for his strength and his mastery of psionic powers. He could move objects with his mind, read thoughts, and even control weaker minds. The challenge would not be easy for Jason, who had no such abilities. Jason met Scytherin's gaze, unwavering. "Then let's see if your strength is enough to stop me," he replied, his voice calm but full of determination. The two men were led to an arena in the center of the palace, surrounded by the watching crowd. The ground was hard, and the air was thick with anticipation. Zalzuria watched from above, her heart racing. She was unsure of what to think. A part of her feared for Jason. Lord Scytherin was a powerful fighter, and his psionics were unmatched. The fight began. Scytherin attacked first, his mind reaching out to Jason. With a wave of his hand, objects around them began to fly through the air. He aimed a sharp metal rod straight at Jason's chest, but Jason, with his quick reflexes, ducked just in time, the rod missing him by inches. The crowd gasped. Jason wasn't like the others who had faced Scytherin. He was fast. He was unpredictable. And most importantly, he wasn't afraid. The battle raged on, but with every move, it became clear that Jason was more than just a simple soldier. He was using the environment to his advantage, relying on his instincts and human ingenuity. Each time Scytherin tried to use his psionic powers to control the fight, Jason found a way to break free. Finally, with a swift move, Jason managed to knock Scytherin off balance, sending him crashing to the ground. The crowd fell silent. Jason stood over him, breathing heavily, but with a triumphant smile on his face. The challenge was over. He had won. Zalzuria's heart pounded in her chest. She had never seen anything like this before. The human had not only survived, but he had defeated one of the most powerful warriors in the Dominion. She couldn't look away. The battle in the arena had ended, but the tension in the air had only grown stronger. Jason stood, breathing heavily, over the fallen body of Lord Scytherin. The crowd around them was silent, eyes wide with disbelief. No one had ever thought a human could defeat a Velari warlord, let alone one as powerful as Scytherin. But Jason had done it. He had won. Zalzuria watched from the balcony above, her heart racing. She had never seen anyone fight like this before. Jason's movements were sharp and precise, unlike anything the Velari were used to. It was as if he anticipated every move, his mind constantly adapting. Scytherin lay on the ground, breathing heavily, his pride shattered. He glared up at Jason with a look of pure hatred, but Jason simply turned his back, walking away with quiet confidence. As he made his way to the side of the arena, he caught Zalzuria's gaze from above. Their eyes locked for a moment, and Zalzuria felt a strange pull in her chest. Jason's gaze was steady, almost daring her to look away. She didn't. She was the princess of the Dominion, one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and yet here was a human, someone she had once thought of as inferior, who had done what no one else could. He had beaten Scytherin, and now he had captured her attention in a way no one ever had. Zalzuria quickly turned away, feeling her cheeks flush. What was happening to her? She had never felt anything like this before. She had rejected countless suitors, men far more powerful than Jason. So why did she feel this strange attraction to him? Back on the floor of the arena, Jason finally stopped and faced the crowd. There was no arrogance in his stance, no pride. Instead, he seemed calm, as though he had expected to win all along. He didn't seem to understand the full impact of what he had just done. He didn't care about power or recognition. He was simply a man doing his job, protecting those who needed him. Zalzuria found herself impressed and frustrated. She couldn't allow herself to be distracted by this human. There were bigger matters to consider, but try as she might, she couldn't shake the feeling that something between them had changed. The way he had looked at her, so confident, so unfazed by everything around him, it made her question everything she thought she knew. That evening, Zalzuria found herself alone in her private chambers, staring out of the large windows that overlooked the vast landscape of Velari Prime. The stars twinkled in the sky, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop thinking about Jason. His eyes, his voice, his courage, it all felt so different from the men she had known. But it was dangerous. A princess like her could never fall for a human. It was against everything her people believed. She had spent her whole life being taught that she was above them, that the Velari were superior in every way. And yet now she was questioning everything. Zalzuria sighed, her thoughts swirling. She couldn't allow herself to be distracted by forbidden thoughts, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't forget the human who had stolen her attention, and perhaps a part of her heart. The days after Jason's victory in the arena passed quickly, but a quiet tension hung over Valari Prime. Thalzariah could feel it everywhere she went. The whispers of the nobles, the cold glares from her father's advisors. It was clear that her people were not pleased with the attention Jason had gained. They saw him as a threat, an outsider who had humiliated their champion and now held too much sway over their princess. But despite the political pressure, Thalzariah couldn't help herself. She found herself thinking about Jason more and more. Every time he looked at her with those steady, confident eyes, her heart would race. She hated that she was becoming distracted by him, but she couldn't deny the pull he had on her. One evening, Thalzariah was in the palace gardens, walking alone under the stars. The peaceful night air calmed her, but her thoughts were anything but peaceful. She was lost in her own mind when she suddenly heard a rustling behind her. Before she could react, a sharp pain shot through her side. She gasped and spun around to see a figure emerging from the shadows. It was a masked assassin, holding a bloodied knife. The assassin lunged at her, but Thalzariah was quick. She used her psionic powers to push him back, sending him crashing into a nearby fountain. But the attack had already been made. Her side throbbed, and she could feel the warmth of blood seeping through her gown. She tried to focus, but the pain made her dizzy. The assassin slowly stood, drawing another blade, his eyes burning with hatred. Just as Thalzariah braced for another attack, she heard heavy footsteps. Jason appeared from around the corner, his eyes wide with surprise at the sight of the assassin. Without hesitation, he rushed toward her, pulling out a sleek, silver-bladed knife from his belt. The assassin turned to face him, but Jason didn't wait for him to make a move. In one swift motion, he tackled the man to the ground, pinning him beneath his weight. The assassin struggled, but Jason was too strong. He knocked the blade from the assassin's hand, then slammed his fist into the man's face, knocking him unconscious. Jason turned back to Thalzariah, his face filled with concern. "Are you all right?" Thalzariah was still reeling from the shock of the attack, but she nodded, wincing at the pain in her side. "I'm fine. But how did you?" "I was following you," Jason replied, his voice low. "I wasn't far behind. I didn't trust the atmosphere here. Something didn't feel right." Thalzariah's heart skipped a beat. He had been following her. He had come to protect her, even without being asked. No one had ever done that before. Jason knelt beside her, his hands gentle as he examined the wound on her side. It was deep but not fatal. "You're lucky," he said, "but we need to get you to the medics now." She didn't argue. She let him help her to her feet, and together they hurried toward the palace. The sounds of the night seemed distant, and all Thalzariah could focus on was the warmth of Jason's hand on her arm and the strange feeling of safety she felt in his presence. As they moved quickly through the corridors of the palace, Thalzariah couldn't stop thinking. Why had someone tried to kill her? And why had Jason been there to save her? It wasn't just coincidence. Someone in the Dominion was trying to get rid of her. But why? Thalzariah woke up in her chambers, the soft glow of dawn seeping through the windows. Her side ached, but the medics had done their job. The wound was stitched up, and she was recovering faster than she expected. But her mind was far from peaceful. The assassination attempt still haunted her. Jason had saved her life, no question about it. But why had he been there? Why had he been following her? She had never given him permission to do so. He was a soldier, not one of her guards, yet he had acted faster than anyone else in the palace. And who had sent the assassin? The question swirled in her mind as she stood and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was rising over the vast Valari landscape, but Thalzariah couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was unfolding within the Dominion. Someone wanted her dead. But who? She dressed quickly, deciding to speak with her father. She needed answers, and he would have them. She had to find out if the assassination attempt was a political move, or if it was something more personal. Was it because of her rejection of the human alliance, or was someone in the court trying to weaken her position as heir to the throne? As she made her way to the emperor's private chambers, she couldn't help but feel the weight of her responsibilities pressing down on her. She had been trained to be a ruler, to keep the dominion strong, but her role as a leader had never felt more difficult. When she entered the emperor's chambers, she found him seated at his desk, as always, surrounded by reports and communication from the dominion's farthest reaches. He didn't look up as she entered, continuing his work as though nothing was wrong. "Father," Stories.Reddit said, her voice firm, "I need to know everything about the attack on me last night." The emperor slowly turned his chair toward her, his face unreadable. "I have already heard about the incident. A lone assassin. You're lucky, my daughter." Stories.Reddit crossed her arms. "Do you know who sent him?" The emperor's expression hardened, but he didn't respond immediately. For a long moment he stared at his daughter, measuring her. "I do not know yet," he finally said, his tone cold. "But I will find out. I have already instructed the guards to investigate the matter." Stories.Reddit felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Her father's response seemed too casual. She had expected him to be more concerned, more urgent. Instead, he sounded almost indifferent. "Father," she pressed, her voice quiet but firm. "Who would want me dead? Who in the Dominion could be behind this?" The emperor stood, walking slowly toward the window. "The Dominion is a vast place. Stories.Reddit. There are many who might wish you harm. Those who disagree with your views, your refusal to marry, your decisions about Earth. But I will take care of it. Trust me." Stories.Reddit frowned. She wanted to trust her father, but something didn't feel right. There was an emptiness in his words, a lack of true concern that made her uneasy. As she turned to leave, the door opened, and Jason entered the room. His eyes locked with hers, and for a moment, she forgot where she was. His presence felt strong, steady, and calming. "Princess," Jason said, his voice low and serious. "I wanted to make sure you were all right. The guards informed me you were resting." Stories.Reddit nodded, grateful for his presence, but she could see her father's eyes narrow as Jason stood beside her. "You should leave, human," the emperor said, his voice cold. "This is a private matter for my daughter and me." Jason didn't flinch. "I'm not leaving your side until we figure out who did this. You can't just sweep this under the rug." Stories.Reddit felt a strange surge of respect for him. Jason wasn't intimidated by her father, and he wasn't willing to let this go. The emperor stared at Jason for a long time, but in the end, he said nothing. Stories.Reddit looked at her father, and then back at Jason. She knew she could trust him more than anyone else in this palace right now. "Fine," she said, her voice firm. "We'll find out who did this. Together." The following days passed in a haze of uncertainty. Stories.Reddit and Jason worked together in secret, trying to uncover the truth behind the assassination attempt. Her father, Emperor Veros, insisted that he would handle the matter, but his lack of urgency and the coldness in his eyes made Stories.Reddit more suspicious than ever. Jason, despite being a human, proved himself to be more reliable than any of the Velarri officers her father had trusted. He had been right by her side after the attack, and now he was determined to help her find the answers. Late one evening, they met in the palace library. The room was quiet, the shelves filled with old books and records that stretched across the walls. Stories.Reddit's mind raced with possibilities. Who could want her dead? And why now? Jason glanced around, making sure no one was watching. "We need to be careful," he whispered. "The more we ask questions, the more attention we'll draw." Stories.Reddit nodded, her eyes focused on the records in front of them. She was searching for anything that could explain the attack. "My father seems too calm about all of this. He says he'll handle it, but I don't trust him. Someone in this palace is involved." Jason walked over to the records and scanned through them. There's one name that keeps coming up. Lord Scytherin. He's been in the Emperor's court for a long time. Zalzuria's heart skipped a beat. Lord Scytherin. He had been her father's most trusted advisor, the one who had fought against Jason in the arena. Was it possible he had a hand in the attempt on her life? We need to find out what he's been up to recently, Zalzuria said, her voice low. He may have a motive, and if he's involved, I won't let him get away with it. Jason nodded. Let's see what we can find, but we'll need proof. Otherwise, we're just making enemies. Together, they sifted through documents and old communication logs. The deeper they dug, the more it seemed like there was a growing conspiracy within the palace. Lord Scytherin's name appeared several times, especially in reports that seemed to have been erased or hidden. Someone had gone to great lengths to make sure certain details stayed secret. As Zalzuria examined a particular document, she froze. It was a letter from an unknown source, marked with the seal of the Imperial Guard, but the handwriting was unfamiliar. The letter spoke of a plot to weaken the line of succession, and it mentioned her specifically. This is it, she whispered, holding the letter up for Jason to see. This confirms it. Someone's been trying to remove me from the throne. Jason leaned closer, studying the letter. This confirms everything, but we still don't know who is behind it. If Lord Scytherin is involved, he won't go down without a fight. Zalzuria's heart sank. Lord Scytherin had been one of the most loyal servants to her father, and now he might be the very one trying to destroy her. Could her father have been blind to this, or was he part of it? We need to confront him, Jason said, his voice full of determination. We can't let this go on. Zalzuria hesitated. Confronting Lord Scytherin would be dangerous. He was a powerful figure, and if he had any connections within the Imperial Guard, it could spell disaster. But there was no other choice. She couldn't wait for her father to act when she was certain he wasn't taking the threat seriously. I'll do it, she said, her voice steady. We'll confront Scytherin together. We'll find out who's behind this, no matter what it takes. Jason gave her a firm nod, showing his support. We're in this together. And so the two of them set a plan in motion. It would be dangerous, but Zalzuria couldn't stand by and let her life, and her future, be controlled by shadows any longer. She would fight for the truth, even if it meant going up against the very people she had once trusted. The night was quiet, almost too quiet. Zalzuria stood in the shadow of the Grand Palace, her heart pounding with nervous energy. She and Jason had planned their next move carefully, but the fear of what they were about to do weighed heavily on her. They were about to confront Lord Scytherin, the man who might be behind the attempt on her life. They had waited until the dead of night, when the palace would be asleep, to slip into the lower halls. The guards were few, and the shadows were their allies. Zalzuria could feel the tension in the air as they moved, every step bringing them closer to the man who could destroy everything she had worked for. Jason was beside her, his presence a steady anchor. Despite the danger, he didn't seem afraid. His eyes were sharp, scanning the area as they crept down the hallways. He looked at her, his voice low. Are you sure about this? Zalzuria nodded, her face hardening. We don't have a choice. If Scytherin is behind this, we need to stop him now. My father won't do it. He's too blind to see what's right in front of him. Jason didn't argue. He understood. He had seen the way her father had dismissed her concerns before, and he knew that only Zalzuria had the strength to face the traitor head-on. She had to take charge, for her people and for herself. As they reached the door to Lord Scytherin's chambers, Zalzuria paused. The heavy silence of the palace seemed to close in around them. She felt a brief moment of doubt, but she pushed it away. This was her only chance. She glanced at Jason. Ready? Jason gave her a slight nod. Let's go. With a quick motion, Zalzuria pushed the door open. The room was dark, but a faint light from the nearby window illuminated the tall, regal figure standing by the desk. Lord Scytherin was there, as they had expected, writing something by candlelight. He looked up in surprise, his eyes narrowing as he recognized them. Princess Tal-Zuraya, and a human. What is this nonsense? Tal-Zuraya stepped forward, her voice cold and commanding. We know what you've done, Suitor. We know you were behind the assassination attempt. For a moment, the room was silent. Suitor didn't move, but the tension in the air was thick. He slowly stood from his desk, his expression hardening. You're mistaken, Princess. I have done nothing but serve the Dominion. Tal-Zuraya didn't flinch. You think I'm blind to your schemes. We found the evidence, Suitor. The letter. The records. Your involvement with the Imperial Guard. This isn't a mistake. Suitor's face darkened, but he didn't back down. You're playing a dangerous game, Princess. Your father has been too soft on you. You think you can rule this empire. You're weak, just like your mother. Tal-Zuraya felt a rush of anger at his words, but she held her ground. I'm stronger than you think, and I won't let you destroy my family. Jason stepped forward, his voice steady. You're done, Suitor. It's over. Suitor's eyes flickered with something like fear, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, calculating look. You think you can just barge into my chambers and threaten me? You have no idea who you're dealing with. Before Tal-Zuraya could respond, Suitor moved quickly, his hand going to a hidden compartment in his desk. But Jason was faster. With one smooth motion, he knocked Suitor's hand away and grabbed his wrist, holding him firm. You should have stayed quiet, Suitor, Jason said, his grip tightening. Now you'll answer for your crimes. Tal-Zuraya's heart raced as she watched the struggle. She had never seen Jason so intense, so focused. The traitor was no match for him. With Suitor subdued, Jason turned to Tal-Zuraya. What do you want to do with him? Tal-Zuraya stood tall, her eyes hard. We're taking him to the council. Let them see the truth. If my father refuses to act, then I'll do it myself. Jason nodded, a small smile of approval on his face. You're a true leader, Tal-Zuraya. We'll make sure he doesn't get away with this. The two of them moved quickly, hauling the traitor from the room. For the first time in a long time, Tal-Zuraya felt the weight of the palace lift from her shoulders. She was no longer just the princess. She was the ruler she had always promised to become. The halls of the imperial palace were filled with whispers as word spread that Lord Suitor had been captured. Tal-Zuraya walked beside Jason, her heart pounding. The decision of what to do next weighed heavily on her. She knew that exposing Suitor for his betrayal wouldn't be easy. Her father's advisors would resist. There was no way they would let a traitor's actions be revealed without a fight. They entered the council chamber, a large room with marble floors and towering windows that looked out over the city. The emperor, her father, sat at the head of the table, his cold eyes fixed on the scene before him. Around him were the leaders of the Dominion, each one a powerful figure in their own right. The air was thick with tension. As soon as Tal-Zuraya and Jason entered, all eyes turned to them. Lord Suitor, still bound and kneeling in the center of the room, looked angry and defiant. His eyes flashed with fury as he stared at Tal-Zuraya. Father, Tal-Zuraya began, her voice steady. I bring before you the truth. Lord Suitor was behind the assassination attempt on my life. He has betrayed this family and the Dominion. The room was silent for a long moment, the council members exchanging uneasy glances. Finally, the emperor spoke. His voice was cold, filled with authority. You bring accusations without proof, daughter. These are serious claims. How do you expect us to believe this? Tal-Zuraya held up the letter she had found, the evidence they had uncovered. Here is the proof, father. Suitor has been plotting against me and the line of succession. This letter was sent by someone in the Imperial Guard, but the handwriting matches his. He is the one who's been working to weaken my position. The emperor's eyes flickered for a brief moment, but he quickly masked it with a calm expression. He looked at Suitor, who was still kneeling, his face full of rage. "Scytharan," the Emperor said slowly, "is this true? Have you been conspiring against the throne?" Lord Scytharan's eyes narrowed, but he didn't look away. "This is all a lie, Emperor," he spat. "Your daughter has been blinded by a human. She doesn't understand what's best for the Dominion. I was simply trying to protect our people from the dangerous alliance she was planning with Earth." The room erupted in murmurs. The idea of an alliance with Earth had been controversial, and many of the council members were still opposed to it. But Zal-Zuriya stood firm, looking at Scytharan with disgust. "You're lying," she said. "You didn't care about the Dominion. You cared about your own power." Scytharan remained silent, refusing to admit anything. His eyes locked with the Emperor's, as if searching for support, but the Emperor said nothing. He just watched, his face unreadable. Jason stepped forward, his voice calm but strong. "The truth is right here in front of you. Scytharan tried to kill your daughter. If you can't see that, then what kind of ruler are you?" The words hung in the air like a challenge. Zal-Zuriya could feel her heart racing, her anger rising. But she knew she had to stay calm. This was her moment to prove that she could lead, to show that she was strong enough to take control of the Dominion. The Emperor remained silent, his eyes never leaving Scytharan. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "Scytharan," he said, his voice heavy with finality, "you have betrayed the throne and your people. For your actions, you are hereby removed from your position as my advisor." Scytharan's face twisted with rage. "You can't do this. You have no idea what you're letting your daughter do." "I've made my decision," the Emperor interrupted, "and you will face the consequences." A guard stepped forward and grabbed Scytharan by the arms, pulling him away from the council table. He was led out of the room, his protests echoing in the distance. Zal-Zuriya stood tall, a sense of victory flooding through her. It wasn't over yet, but this was a big step. She had stood up to the traitor and, more importantly, to her father. She had shown that she would not let the Dominion fall into the hands of corruption. The room was still, but the tension seemed to melt away. The council members exchanged glances, some with uncertainty, others with respect. Zal-Zuriya had done what needed to be done. Her father looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You've proven your point, daughter. But remember, ruling is not a game. It's a heavy burden." Zal-Zuriya nodded. "I understand, father, and I'm ready to carry that burden." As she stood there, beside Jason, she knew the road ahead would be difficult. But for the first time in her life, she felt ready. She was no longer just a princess. She was the leader the Dominion needed. The council chamber was empty now, and the heavy silence that had filled the room began to fade. Zal-Zuriya stood by the large window, looking out over the vast city of Velari. The sun was rising, casting golden light over the land. It felt like the start of a new day, not just for the planet, but for her as well. She had done it. The traitor had been removed, and her father had finally acknowledged her strength. But there was still so much work to be done. Lord Scytharan's betrayal was only the beginning. The real challenge was rebuilding the trust that had been broken within the Dominion, and with her father. Jason stood beside her, his presence a quiet support. The calm after the storm had settled, but Zal-Zuriya knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter. The weight of leadership pressed down on her more than ever. "You did well," Jason said softly. "You proved that you're ready to lead." Zal-Zuriya turned to face him, a small, genuine smile tugging at her lips. "I didn't do it alone. I couldn't have done it without you." Jason met her gaze, his eyes warm. "I'll always be by your side, princess." Zal-Zuriya's heart skipped a beat. There was something in his words, something in the way he looked at her, that made her feel both comforted and uncertain. She had never expected to find a friend, and maybe even more, among the humans. But Jason had become someone she trusted with her life. Just then, her father entered the room. His presence was imposing, but there was something different in his eyes today. For the first time in a long time, Zal-Zuriah saw a flicker of respect. Zal-Zuriah, the emperor said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. You have done what was necessary. I cannot deny that. Zal-Zuriah stood tall, meeting her father's gaze. It's not about what was necessary, father. It's about doing what's right. The Dominion needs change, and I am ready to bring it. Her father studied her for a long moment. The silence between them was thick, as if he were weighing his words carefully. Finally, he spoke. I know you've always believed in your own way, my daughter. But leadership is not just about making decisions. It's about unity, balance. He paused, as though searching for the right words. You have shown me that you are capable. But the path ahead will not be easy. You will face more challenges. And there will be more enemies. Zal-Zuriah nodded. She had already known that. The road ahead would be difficult, but she was no longer afraid. She had made her choice, and now she would walk it with her head held high. I'm ready for whatever comes next, she said, her voice steady. And I'll make sure the Dominion is strong again. Her father's expression softened, just for a moment. I will support you, Zal-Zuriah. You have my blessing. For the first time, Zal-Zuriah felt a sense of peace settle in her chest. Her father's support wasn't something she had expected, but it was something she had longed for. Now, it was hers. With Jason standing beside her, Zal-Zuriah felt ready to face whatever challenges awaited her. The road ahead would be long, but it was hers to lead, and she would lead it with strength, wisdom, and honor. As she looked out at the horizon, she could see the future before her, a future she would shape with her own hands. The Dominion would rise again, stronger than ever, and she would make sure of it.